Loud. Okay, now we're ready.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So for those of you here not hearing the recording, welcome to the second program here at the Wilson Museum. The Wilson Museum is located on the shores of Penobscot Bay in the homeland of the Penobscot Nation and the Wabanaki Confederacy. These lands and waters have been their home for thousands of years, and their relationships to and stewardship of this place continue today. Today, I'm excited to introduce Laura Sprague, a scholar of Maine's 18th and 19th century art, architecture, and field culture. Sprague has contributed to research, publications, and exhibitions for the Bowdoin College Museum of Art, the Brickstore Museum in Kennebunk, and the Maine Historical Society and Teapot Museum in Portland. She was, in reading a little bit more on her online, she's been very involved in Maine Historical Society's work to get the Longfellow House restored for the public in its interpretation. I have to admit, I've been to the Maine Historical Society a bunch of times, and always won the Longfellow House. Laura's presentation today looks at ceramic tableware in Castine from 1690 to 1840, and how this part of our material culture history can tell us about past training networks of Castine and other parts of Maine. This is part of our Connecting Collections program series, and we were inspired to reach out to Laura by the beautiful and interesting ceramic tableware you see in the John and Phoebe Perkins house and in other exhibits connected to Castine history, and wondering what it could tell us about Castine's long history as a globally connected community. This Connecting Collections program series is made possible through the generous support of Bangor Savings Bank, and our next Collecting Collections program is on October 18th, featuring Dr. Bonnie Newsom, who is a professor of anthropology at the University of Maine and a member of the Penobscot Nation. And she'll be speaking about examples of pre-contact Wabanaki pottery in the Wilson Museum collection and elsewhere, and how we can consider the design choices made by Wabanaki potters in creating these pieces that we see today. So again, that will be October 18th at 3 p.m. here at the museum, and also available on Zoom. And with that, thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
You should have an app.
Okay. In 1828, when Anne Boyle, the Washingtonian who traveled throughout America, visited Maine, she was surprised. I had expected to find Maine a cold, dreary, barren region, and the people rough and barbarous. No such thing. I saw no difference between it and the other states east of the Hudson. Although the livability of early colonial and federal Maine, part of Massachusetts until 1820, has often been regarded as a phenomenon by some, Maine's advantages have long been recognized. Domestic circumstances of many coastal families in early Maine compared favorably to those of their contemporaries in other New England states. This presentation provides an overview of the Wilson Museum's colonial and 19th century ceramic tablewares as part of the Connecting Collections series. I thank the museum for inviting me, and to Abby Dunham for her help with the information about the museum's objects and for some wonderful new images. For their Castine histories and local associations, they help reveal broad issues of global trade, as well as style, development of European American manufacturing, and patterns of patronage. I've included related Maine examples with histories from Suffolk to Ellsworth to reveal how the choices Castine residents made relate to those others in other families in Maine. Well, this is like one of the greatest things about Castine history, Fort Penobscot. Maine's role as the buffer between New England and French Acadia during the 17th century brought widespread destruction of villages and buildings. And as a result, with very little above ground material culture, archaeological sites provide the best documentation of ceramic wares used in 17th century Maine. Great sources survive up and down the coast and along the rivers, and of particular significance is Fort Penobscot, which stood right nearby on the edge of Penobscot Bay. The 1981 to 84 excavation led by Alex Faulkner of the University of Maine, who's seen he's in one of the trenches there on the left in the newspaper photo. Yielded remarkable discoveries about French Acadia. Published archaeological reports by Alaric Faulkner and Gretchen Faulkner in the 1980s, and more recently by Kevin Mock at the University of Maine, have documented the early ceramics used at the fort. These are illustrations from those scholarly reports, but they show the different forms, these wonderful chafing dishes in the French earthenware known as Santonware from the southwest of France. There's German stonewares and wonderful apothecary jars, bowls, mugs, a whole range of tablewares and cooking goods. This is a wonderful Bartman German stoneware jug from the Wilson Museum's collection that was found by Dr. Wheeler, the local historian at Fort Penobscot. It must have been an early excavation, but it relates to the other forms that were found at the fort during the Faulkner's excavation. The other form, the other kind of ware that was shown to show it up was a tin glazed earthenware. And the tin in the glaze coated the whole surface, and it created a smooth white surface in imitation of Chinese porcelains, which were then being imported into Europe, but the Europeans had no idea how the Chinese were making these very luxurious tableware. A wonderful example of stoneware is this jug that has a history in Saco in the Scammon family. These German stonewares made their way into British North America through the British trade, because the British controlled the American access in and out of the colonists couldn't trade with countries outside of Britain. That's how they kept track of what was coming in and out, and tax revenues. But these extraordinary 17th century German stonewares do survive with many histories. This is a very large, 16 inches or more, jug from Vestergaard with beautiful blue and brown glazes. And this is a medallion on the side of William III on horseback. It's very sophisticated design with the medallion as the breast of this big double-headed eagle. William reigned between 1689 and 1702, which gives this jug a very tight time range for manufacture. It was owned by Humphrey Scammon of Saco, who died in 1727. And its history reveals the turmoil of the Indian Wars in colonial Maine. In 1703, French soldiers and Micmac warriors raided English settlements in southern Maine from Wells to Scarborough. Humphrey Scammon, his wife Elizabeth, and their 2 sons were abducted and taken into Canada. Family history relates that the jug still stood on the table in their homestead on their release from captivity and returned to Saco a year later. And it's a recorded history, oral history, family history, but it's entirely possible that it just, because once the Indian raids, French and Indian raids took place, those settlements were completely abandoned. So it's entirely possible that when they came back to the home, the jug was still there. But it was given to the York Institute Museum in the 19th century. It's now the Saco Museum. During the 18th century, British pottery manufacturers began their ascent in the marketplace through production that was driven by the Industrial Revolution, providing a large percentage of the tablewares in colonial America through the British transatlantic trade. The collection of the George Cade House in Portland provides an excellent overview of the wares typically found in colonial Maine. The house was constructed in 1755 by George Tate, who arrived from London, England, as the new mass agent to oversee all the major timbering operations on behalf of the Royal Navy. The Tate family lost their house in bankruptcy after the Revolution, and it became a tenement during the 19th century. In the 1930s, the National Society of Colonial Dames of America in the state of Maine purchased and restored the house and opened it to the public. As a representative merchant family's dwelling, its collections and interpretation are based on documentary and comparative evidence with a focused target date of 1760. The parlor, which is the best room in the house, featured a corner cupboard, or what they call a bocat, in the corner, where fine imported tablewares could be displayed but be out of harm's way. Based on archaeological evidence and few scant objects that descended in the family, we know that the Tates owned various types of Chinese export porcelain. These included porcelain decorated with blue cobalt under the glaze seen in these wonderful early examples from about 1720 to 1740. The Chinese have perfected a true hard piece porcelain with the use of two principal ingredients: kaolin, a fine white clay, and pétance, a hard felt spathic block, which when fired at high temperature, fuse with the clay to form this lustrous, translucent white body. The Chinese kept the manufacturing process secret for centuries and controlled the export of desirable Chinese porcelains to the Western market. And it's amazing how quickly these really luxurious objects came into colonial. And they're found in many archaeological excavations. The Wilson Museum owns this wonderful punch bowl with a pumice blossom on the branch of the tree, and then a wonderful fretwork around the rim. And this has one of those very valuable labels called a brandy note, where antiquarians or family members would paste these labels onto the objects to help keep track of their history, and they're usually quite accurate and very, very important for historians. And this came from Roland Howard's collection. I remember meeting him in the 1980s when I was working on an inventory for the Maine Humanities Council, and it's still in his house in Blue Hill, and a lot of the things that came to the Wilson Museum from his request, I remember seeing them, so it's wonderful to see these things again. Another popular Chinese export porcelain from the 1740 to 60 period features this brown glaze on the outside of the vessel, on the exterior. And it's referred to as Batavia type because the brown glaze was associated with the Dutch port in which it was often exported. And this one is a particularly nice example that has a Tate house, a Tate family history descended from the Ingrahams, and was given to the house in the 1940s, just as the museum was. But this has nice little reserves with red flowers and possibly peonies. The dummy board on the left depicts Phyllis, a servant to Elizabeth Wendell Smith of Wyndham, Maine, which is just west of Portland, and it's in the collection of Historic New England. It's a remarkable artifact, and it uniquely illustrates Chinese porcelain in early New England. Phyllis is seen holding a tray or a serving salver with a tall chocolate pot, and there on the tray is this little group of Batavia type chocolate cups. And in this case, they're brown glaze, and you have cobalt underglaze blue on the inside. So you really can't ask for more if you're looking for early documentation of Chinese in New England. But those are the best things a family would own, the Chinese porcelains. For the day-to-day for day-to-day activities, they would have used a very wide range of English pottery and American locally produced redware or stonewares. At Tate House, the cupboard in the kitchen, which you see here, holds many of these types of ceramics. Again, based on archaeological evidence, the Tates own a wide range of English pottery. The shards are very small, but they reveal valuable information about the pottery types that were originally in the house. They included tin-glazed earthenware, often called Delftware, after the Dutch city that was a center for its production and export. There are also fragments of building ware that had a marble brown glaze. There's a lustrous black glaze called Jackfield Ware. And then the pottery discovered in the L excavation in the 1950s, we also found a lot of local redware. And this wonderful little jug from the Howard collection in the Perkins house, final cover, is an example of these really wonderful redwares. And the collection here has wonderful, there's a great sieve. There's a couple of really terrific milk cans, and it's nice to see this like, in comparison to the the really fine serving pieces. Other English pottery at Tate House included salt glazed, brown, and white stonewares. The British often used molds to create very decorative table forms, which you see in this wonderful pattern book from the and a fragment from Tate House on the left relates to one of these little small mugs with instruments of engine turning on them. If your table couldn't be set with Chinese porcelains, a facsimile white tableware would serve nicely. And white salt glazed stoneware filled this wish at a very low cost. This English example was molded, creating this very decorative, highly decorative white tableware. And the shards from the Tate House L show the different kinds of there's gold patterns, there's fretwork, and the little different kinds of designs. So desirable was Chinese porcelain and so costly to import that the British manufacturers began in the early 18th century to experiment with different formulas to manufacture their own versions. They hadn't discovered the Chinese secret ingredients of kaolin and pepins, but created facsimiles using quartz, sand, and glass to create a white, sometimes translucent material. It's not a true hard paste porcelain, and it's known today in museum field as a soft paste porcelain. In many factories in Europe with royal or aristocratic patronage made soft paste porcelain. And one of the factories was the Worcester Porcelain Works in Worcester, England, beginning in 1751. And they created these wonderful soft paste porcelains decorated in undergrade glazed blue, these Chinese-inspired designs. The teapot on the left is from Tate House, with this wonderful oriental garden with a fretwork fence and chrysanthemums. And then on the right is the underglazed blue cupping saucer in the Roland Howard here. These English examples are decorated with transfer printing, and it was a process that really sped up the decoration and lowered the labor costs. In the process, a design was engraved onto a proper plate, like you'd make an engraving, and the plate was inked, and then the pattern was transferred from the plate onto the porcelain body. And it really did, the process revolutionized the British manufacturing, and it made hundreds of thousands of patterns easily, and you'll see many of them um, in this talk, because it continued into the 19th century. Beginning in 1759, Josiah Wedgwood, a genius in pottery production and marketing, helped drive the success of the British ceramics manufacturing. At his Wedgwood pottery in Staffordshire, he experimented with a wide range of ceramic bodies, creating new types over the years and creating new demand for English tablewares. This is a wonderful, sophisticated coffee pot. Tate House has shards that match it, but we don't yet have a whole object. But it was made around 1770, and it has molded. It has a wonderful body and cover, and we do these intertwined strap handles with these wonderful terminals connecting the handles to the body. At its height in the 19th century, British ceramic manufacturers supplied much of the world with tablewares, and many of these are represented in the Wilson's collection. Another English ceramic tableware, inspired by so this is another example of Wedgwood trying to replicate the Chinese porcelain, but in much more and he called it Queen's Ware when he first introduced it, and gave a set to Queen Charlotte, and says, you want to have your own Queen's Ware. So he just created demand for these things out of just pure genius. But here at the Wilson Museum is one of the best examples of Wedgwood Queen's Ware that in the section. And it is this wonderful platter that's almost 2 feet wide, that was made for His Majesty's 29th Regiment that occupied Castine during the War of 1812. Its molded shape was designed to hold large roasts, and the molded trenches and wells collected the juices. The platter bears the mark of the regiment's 29 in the little transfer print at in an oval with laurel leaves around the edge. And importantly, it bears the stamp of Wedgwood tended to stamp his wares. You want to make sure that everyone knew where they came from, and that it has a wonderful mark on the side. During this occupation in 1814-15, the 29th Regiment used Paws Hall as its mess, and it was on the corner of Maine and Perkins Street, now the location of the Penobscot Inn. And then I think it later became called the Mullet Block, and it's seen this historic image that was reproduced in a wonderful article about the Paws family in one of the museum bulletins, which very nicely is available online if you Google it. So also wonderful materials available. But the house then, or the building then, was the home of the Pawses. And on its withdrawal from Castine, the regimental commander presented the platter to Abigail C. Warren Pawes as a token of appreciation. So it's cracked, it's broken, and has been repaired, but it survives, and it survives because it was treasured by the family. And these are the kinds of tablewares that, if they are cracked and broken, they were thrown in the privy or the trash pit and replaced with the next model, the more fashionable types of ware. So it's really extraordinary that this does survive this wonderful history. One very popular creamware form in Federal America, and illustrated by a number of documented examples throughout coastal Maine, was this large baluster-shaped pitcher, they're sometimes 12 or 15 inches high, that are called today Liverpool-type pitchers. Liverpool refers to the English port of export, but most of them were made by factories in Staffordshire. Americans imported vast numbers, and many pictures with transfer printed decoration, such as you see here, survive in many histories, and some are personalized for their owners. And the Wilson Museum owns wonderful examples of these from Warren Howard's requests. This is Washington Glory, America in Tears, produced following George Washington's death in 1799. And it has history in ancestors to the Wilson family. And then another wonderful example of this decoration survives in the Wadsworth Longfellow House in Portland. It's a childhood home of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the poet. The house was given to Maine Historical Society by the poet's sister, who you see on the left, as an older woman, and then with a beautiful portrait when she was married in 1830. And she's standing in her summer dining room in the back of the house that overlooked her garden. She presented the house to the society, intending it as a memorial to her grandfather, Peleg Wadsworth, and to her poet brother. And among the family heirlooms she preserved to be displayed in the house was a Washington and Glory picture. And the family history was that they always used the picture to serve lemonade on 4th of July. And I you see it in the this is they use every surface to build decorations, and under the spout is a little trench print. A man without example, a patriot without reproach. And then on in the back is a sailing ship, the source of American prosperity. And then there's another wonderful example from Ronald Howard's collection of this is a slightly smaller, maybe about 9 inches high, but it has symbols of America with peace and prosperity, and if you didn't get the message up, or outburst and turn it over, and the symbol of America has rays of sun shining down. So it's just full of these wonderful allusions to success and peace. And the other, the transfer print on the right also has this wonderful landscape scene in the back where the man is plowing his field with his horse.
What is she doing in that picture on the right? Like
She's at, it's sort of like a little altar with a wreath, and she's holding a dove. And this is not a wheat sheaf, but a symbol of peace. Castine's ship Ruthie is celebrated by this picture from the Howard collection. The ship Ruthie was built in 1803 by Samuel Whitney, and Ruthie was likely named for John Perkins's daughter. And this has William Stover was not the recorded master of the ship, but he was a family member, and you know it wouldn't be impossible that he ordered a dozen of these to present to investors in the ship or special presentation. You know, and in reverse is Hail Columbia, this wonderful poem about illumination. They're wonderful hand decorated examples for Maine families, and this is one of several that survive at the Maine Historical Society. This is a special order that depicts the arms of Preble, and that would be Commodore Edward Preble, who was the commander of the American fleet of the siege of Tripoli. And it's amazing that these things do survive, because they are fragile and prosperity for American families after the Revolution and the rise of the middle class expanded the market to British tablewares. And during this time, the English were perfecting the manufacture of hard-case porcelain, which had to compete with the Chinese export porcelains that Americans were then importing directly from China in American ships. In Castine and other Maine towns, wonderful tea and tablewares of these early English porcelains are known. The basket on the left was made of Chinese export porcelain, and it features a hand-painted landscape scene about 1790, 1800. And then on the right is an English teapot with a transfer printed landscape design. Very popular. There's some nice related examples of this I could live on. The Chinese didn't have a problem producing campaign decoration. They didn't that kind of so that's always one way to tell the difference. And this is a simple, pretty plainly decorated Chinese export porcelain that these very simple wares turn up all the time, but they weren't prized by collectors and didn't tend to survive very well. So it's nice when you find examples like this partial set at the Wilson Museum, because it has a history with family members related to the Wilsons, and it's great because it helps record where they were, who was using them. And this sweet little teapot with this wonderful Sprague decoration is a type of porcelain made by the New Hall Company, also in Staffordshire, that operated for about 40 years, from 1780 to 1835. It has a simple fluted body, and the black cipher on the top of the pot was THA for Thatcher and Avery. Back at the Staffordshire potteries, pearlware was redeveloped by Josiah Wedgwood, and was especially well suited to blue decorations because of the cobalt that was added to the glaze. That just a little addition of the cobalt then enhanced the blue decoration, and you can tell it when you see it, because if you look at the bottom, you can always see blue. Blue. The glaze always has a little blue tint to it, and then you know you're looking at it. This is a little wasteful from the palette. I think it's a little Chinese temple, and maybe a pagoda. Looks like it'd be a tree, but it could be very stylized. The Chinese decoration is just decorates. Elegant blue printed dining sets were advertised for sale by many merchants in the early years of the 1800s. And this is a view of some of the serving pieces from Longfellow, large and by most standards elegant dinner service with this blue transfer printed decoration. Known as printed with a pattern that's called Castle and Bridge, the service was recalled by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow as Willowware, a design still with us today. And family tradition maintains that this service was purchased in 1804, at the time that Zelpha Wadsworth married Stephen Longfellow. English transfer printed wares abounded in 19th century Maine, and a wonderful selection survives at the John Black House or Woodlawn in Ellsworth. Done in 1824, the classically inspired residence was based on Asher Benjamin's pattern book, American Builder's Companion. Woodlawn's builder, John Black, helped develop Eastern Maine, and he and his wife Mary may have committed to life on the eastern frontier, but their location in Ellsworth did not deprive them of many of life's luxuries. Beginning with this floor plan, with its large double toilet, which you see running along the first floor on the bottom, and it runs along the entire width of the house. Woodlawn was designed for large scale entertaining. The Black's household help would have been familiar with the china closet, which is depicted. So the L on the right in the lower plan is the kitchen, the original kitchen. And then just inside is the china closet, which is a very large space next to the rear staircase for the servants. So it's in close proximity to the dining room. This tends to be considered the dining room interpretation. It's not only intriguing, this large china closet, but it's a rich source that reveals the Black's choices. Its shelves and cupboards are lined predominantly with printed English tablewares from 1820 to the Civil War. A remarkable number of them can be associated with the Black's purchases between 1827 and 1840. And for these, they patronized Boston merchants and shipped them up to Ellsworth. This is the invoice in the archives at the Black House of purchases for tablewares at Joseph Castine's in Boston. And they blew printed salads and goes on and on. And many of them in that collection. So they relate to many of the English tablewares here at the Wilson Museum, and really do help put them in the broader context. This is a tureen and serving dish from the Black House that has these wonderful classical ruins. And then at the Wilson Museum is this T.J.J. Mayer, the Staffordshire firm. And this is it's a pretty typical pattern that they're calling Florentine. But really the only thing that resembles Florence is maybe a bridge over a river. I mean, there's nothing in that would make you think that this was depicting this Italian city. But it was just part of this marketing it was such an availability that every manufacturer trying to find a way to get the market share. This is a wonderful example. Here at the Wilson Museum, this is a plate with this beautiful deep blue, and the pattern is registered by a Staffordshire manufacturer named Joseph Clemison, and it was part of his classical antiquities series. And on the bottom, it records what this particular scene is. Ulysses weeping at the song of Demodocus. And he made a whole series of these things, all these different scenes that came from the Odyssey, which was written by Homer in the 8th century BCE. So it's really quite wonderful border with the scrolls and the ancient urns. We should have more of them. The love of the ancient world is a terrific theme found in many other Wilson Museum objects, and one that's explored at the exhibit that's on view now at the Bowdoin College Museum of Art, Antiquity in America, the Ancient Mediterranean in the United States. This is a view of the of ceramics on here in the Wood Gallery. And the exhibition explores the passion with which Americans view the classical world and how the ancient Mediterranean has shaped American culture and politics. And detail the case with the copy of the Portland Vase, one of the most famous ancient objects discovered in the 18th century. Let's just let me see how it's related. Chinese patterns continue to be popular. This is a partial finish service here at the museum made by the Davenport Company, also in Staffordshire, and it features Chinese figures with a pagoda in the garden. This kind of decoration is referred to as flow blue because of the way that the glaze is running and it's a little fuzzy. And that was intentional. That they trying to come up with something new. They added a mineral in the glaze to create a flux and force the cobalt to run. But with the mass production, the quality of some of the British wares did begin to deteriorate. And it was at this time in the mid-19th century that American manufacturing was really beginning to secure a bigger share of the ceramics market. And there's some wonderful examples here. The New England potteries marketed their goods to Maine, and there were many different manufacturers over in Bennington, Vermont. They produced a wide range of table and storage vessels throughout the 19th century. And many were made of a yellow body that was covered with this brown mottled glaze that became known as Rockingham, but not to be confused with the Rockingham porcelain works. But these were extremely popular. And according to the catalog record, this picture was owned by the Neiman family off on Holbrook Island. And it's just another example of, just because you're in a remote location doesn't mean that you can't make stylish housewares. And this came to the museum from Anita Harris, who related that her father found it in the house on Holbrook Island when he bought the property. It was called made in the 1840s. There's another related Rockingham style teapot. This is unmarked, but it could be American origin. And it has a Chinaman photo, mold decoration. And then one of the most impressive of these wares is this wonderful hound candle picture, made in East Liverpool, Ohio. Where there was an extraordinary manufacturing in the mid to late 19th century. And the East Liverpool potteries were established in 1839 by a number of potters who emigrated from Staffordshire, England, to America. And they specialized in these yellow body mottled glazed wares. This is a stag hunt. It's a wonder. It's very crisp, a beautifully produced example of a stag hunt, and oak leaves around the rim, and this wonderful hound with the handle. And this has a wonderful mark. Closer to home, the Bangor Stonework Company operated from 1880 to 1917, and it has a fascinating history that was founded by a Swedish immigrant who had been trained by other potteries in New England. And unlike the small regional potteries in Maine, the Bangor Stonework Company imported their clay from big deposits in New Jersey. So, the fact that they could do that with enough profit margin to accommodate the shipments. It's sort of a fascinating study. And this big picture has a wonderful stain on the side. And then there's also a clock, also from the bank. These pottery and porcelain tablewares represent only some of the many fine objects in the Wilson Museum's collection. By learning about them, what they are, how they came to be here, and who used them, we expand our understanding of early life in Maine and, early life in Castine and more about Maine's material. Thank you. Happy to answer questions.
Did the transfer process start?
Well, the examples that I know about started in about 1750 in England. And it wasn't just Worcester. There were a lot of those smaller manufacturers figured out that they could take this really time-honored process and apply it to the ceramic production. Yeah.
Any thoughts on what the earliest English settlers in Maine or something?
Well, I think the kinds of vessels, the vessels that they've excavated from, the stonewares and earthenwares from Penobscot, like Fort William Henry at Penobscot. So you're asking about a century earlier or the
1630 is what I
1630. Well, yeah, those were. I mean, the British have a pretty solid ceramics, potteries underway in Staffordshire, and I think that they're pretty utilitarian, but they tended to be similar to the sort of the reconstructed images from the Penobscot. But similar forms were also made in Britain and then shipped over for the forts here. I can give you. There's actually a wonderful book on Penobscot that was written by Helen Camp and Bob Radley, who was a state archaeologist for many years, and it shows all the different forms. And if they only had a fragment, then they would do a schematic of the overall object. So there are lots of good examples in there.
Actually, fascinating to talk to Gretchen and the folks at Acadia about the difference between the French pottery in Penobscot versus at St. Croix, because they were from different parts of France. So that were really representative pottery looks at those two different early French settlements.
Yeah, and that's what that Kevin Mock had done that research. It was really, and it was fun to see that, 25, 30 years later, the material is still there to be, looked at anew and he was focusing just on the ceramics and how they differed from St. Croix to here, and it was a third, fourth, but it's it's fun to do that kind of research.
You mentioned that Dr. Wheeler had discovered this picture
Yes.
from the Penobscot after the excavation. But did he do an individual?
Well, I think that there were excavations during, like, just amateur excavations during the 19th century, and that's when he was just poking around and found it.
Yeah.
It wasn't part of an official project research. And maybe it's in his history. I didn't look at the object file to see if there might be more about it.
I always had some
You
skepticism.
wonder, well,
That's possibly intact.
well, no, yeah, he may have just found it and knew what it was. So,
Yeah.
but it's definitely the right date and the right right thing.
There is a fragment. It looks from
Yeah.
one view, perfectly whole, but on the other side, it's a crack.
But you do know, of course, one of the fascinating things when anyone has grandchildren or anyone visits is sharding in Castile. And after every storm, there still are shards. And I think almost every other house in Castine has bottles of shards.
Oh, my gosh.
And they're just fascinating. If we all got together and did a puzzle, we probably would have a full set of china. So that, we can look forward to that.
No, because I suppose you could just, in the 19th century, just throw the old broken things out into the bay.
Well, I was talking to a granddaughter who, they had the hotel, it was now a private home. But she said, you know, her grandparents said, yeah, sometimes their sets were just down to nothing, so they just tossed everything in front of the hotel. And actually, I had some pieces, but she still had a piece of pieces. So I'd say, okay, this is, but they do have their own history, which is wonderful.
We have boxes and boxes of shards from the Perkins house. At Court Street that we can get, we just, you know, you can do puzzles all day long.
And
Well, there's some partially reconstructed ones from, done in the 70s, the boxes and boxes more.
well, I think at this point, whoever is going out on a boat should take a jar and spread it, because the next generation of grandchildren are going to need to be able to, we can put them on the beach and, you know, an hour later, they're still sharded. So it's very important.
Endeavor.
What?
I'm just curious, since you had interaction with Roland Howard, do you know of, is there additional documentation somewhere that he kept about his collections? One of our challenges is that we have a lot of really wonderful antiques that we donated, but we don't know a whole lot
Well,
about them.
it might, if he had archives, maybe they went to the Blue Hill Library, or the things that I recorded in the 1980s, they're part of they're in the State Museum archives, but I can send you what I have.
They're wonderful, and they're wonderful period antiques, but we don't know if they
Yeah,
were
well,
just.
I can send you what I have.
I have a question. How would people go about getting a piece customized? Because I imagine that if you had like a mass production, that's easy, but where in the process would it get customized?
Okay, so those, for the armorial, the pictures, the Liverpool pictures with the armorials, those were likely made in Staffordshire, shipped to Liverpool, where they were going to be exported. And then there were decorating shops in those port towns. So sea captain would come in and say, oh, I would like an armorial of my family, and then just open up the big source books that were published. There's a wonderful one called Edmondson's Complete Book of Heraldry, and it was a big book, and you could turn to, you know, Gardner or Sargent or whatever the name was, and it wasn't your personal armorial, but the family names, right? And then they just copy it. So that's how I found there's Cobham, oh my gosh, the Curtises, lots of Portland families. And then, or someone would take a drawing and just give it to the decorator. So there's a block and tackle shop that's at Maine Historical. The Train of Artillery has a big picture with their cannon, and they're in their uniforms, and the uniforms are the same one that the town book. So it can be quite specific, but it's because there was this direct connection between the sea captain and the decorating shop. And there are also wonderful examples known, the Chinese, especially decorated Chinese porcelains. So they're going all the way around into Macau. But the China man doing the decorating didn't understand all of the things, so he would just copy, this is to be red, this is to be blue. And so they're actually porcelains with all the instructions. Because he's just copying it.
Wow.
So there are some really, amusing ones, but they tended to get it.
And would they be decorated after they were glazed and fired?
Yeah, and then they fire them again.
Okay.
In the lower, in the lower.
Ah, all right, great.
And that would happen if you, say you wanted, this gilding. The gilding needed to be, adhered, but it didn't need to be under high temperature. So those would just be little decorating shops in the ports.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Well, it reminds me of the Chinese ship portraits, that so many of the ship
Oh,
portraits
yeah,
that we
yeah.
have around here were done by Chinese artists. Wow, the ship was on so many other Chinese, other East Asian ports.
Yeah, you find more of those in Salem or Philadelphia, where ships are going directly to China. They're not so many
Not
that-
so easy.
Where Penobscot does?
Yeah,
Are there any examples in Maine of what I call canton ware, particularly in the pattern that was the precursor of the blue willow
Yeah,
pattern?
there's some at Woodlawn.
Yeah.
There's, I know that there's some, not very many left, but there's some at the Walter Blanco house, and, but you do find those, yeah. They're very popular, and I think of all the Chinese export, that they were probably the least expensive. Almost like used as ballast.
That's what I heard. They
Yeah.
actually were used as ballast.
Because you put the tea and silk at the top of the ship. And then it wouldn't matter if the porcelain got wet, because it didn't care. But the silk did.
And I noticed in a lot of the examples for the Liverpool jugs, the decorations were in like a blackish color, but on Stover's, like on that one, it was colorful. Were most of them black and white?
Well,
Were
they
some of them
tended to be printed in black, and then they would hand color them to get the colors. And they would do those, sometimes they would do those at the factory, but then it would be part of this decorating process. I think it depending on the volume of specialty things would be done at work.
Interesting.
But if they were making, a whole kiln worth, then they would glaze them all the same. And fire them there.
So it was more customized and specialized if it was colored.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
you can see those, like, basically propaganda, sort of propaganda pieces from the American patriotism, like that
Absolutely.
post-war thing of, yay, America.
But they're buying
Don't get your money.
English, but they're buying British wares.
Right.
Because they
Yeah.
have the manufacturing know-how.
Yeah, yeah. And the British were making it saying, yay, America. Yeah, they knew their market.
Oh, shoot, yeah.
One of the questions there, you want to do a deeper dive, is there a resource that kind of covers Maine ceramics?
Ceramics?
Yeah.
Well, I think between like some of the archaeological reports and yeah, I can help.
It's amazing people that know this.
Mm.
I remember with our historic archaeologist that can pull, like, well, that's
Oh, no.
pearlware, that's
Oh, I know. it's so
Ware,
much
that's,
fun.
Tad
Yeah.
Baker, who's like, I'm like, okay.
Yeah. And it's the archaeological material that's so much fun because you know exactly where it was and who was there and what the circumstances are. And then when you find, like the Tate House, there's hardly any 18th century material, like early colonial material. in this excavation. So we're not really sure of the circumstances of when the L was taken apart, but it's enough to, you know, you look at that and you look at probate inventories, like how many things did somebody own, and if it's willed in a creamware, tortoiseshell, all these different decorations, then you can really assemble a representative assortment to show what the wares were. And if you look in the account books for the merchants in the towns, you know, they might be selling 1 or 2 cups or a pitcher or a teapot, and because if stuff was broken and you needed it, then you buy what was available. You didn't have a chance to order a whole new set, or you didn't have to buy new or whatever. But it's just amazing to me how many ones and twos and would get sold in the 18th century in Maine. Filling in things that we need.
Very thankful that people didn't take their stuff to the dump. They just threw it out the door and it doesn't associate it.
Into the trash pits.
Well, what an education. Thank you
Well, you're
so
welcome.
very much. You need to be here every other month. That have missed your presentation. And particularly in the summer when there's so, I mean, this room would have been filled.
So many people here.
Well, and we're recording it, so that's good, but also getting to know Laura and knowing and she's already helped us learn more about what we have in the collection and the opportunities. So we need to do that so that we can add, so that regular visitors can learn more about it. Right now, they just go into the china closet and there's like a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So to be able to have that knowledge is really exciting.
Well, I like the picture of, you know, the everyday China, you know, and then the really fine China. And I have a house that's like was built in, say, 1820, but they had built in a corner cupboard. And when we bought the house, it's, you know, it's just shedding paint like, and my husband said, that's the first thing that's going to be done. I said, absolutely not. People pay a fortune to make something look that old.
And it is
So
that
I
old.
moved it out to the front porch. It was strange to be there, and then I had my husband secure it to the wall because I thought a child would just could fall over it sometime. But that is the recipient of old bottles found on the shore and shards, and it's just, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
But it was headed to the dump, the transfer station. But yes.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.